Alright, let's finish up by talking about what furries aren't. So I'm addressing some of these misconceptions people have about furries. Furries are not bronies. I will point out, full disclosure, I am a brony. So. My making fun of bronies is making fun of myself. Okay. So the furry and brony fandoms do overlap. So we find that about 20 to 25% of furries call themselves bronies. We are also now studying bronies. We are going to BronyCon this year to study bronies. 20% of bronies are furries. So there is considerable overlap between the two fandoms. And yet, furries and bronies consistently throw one another under the bus. When furries are being picked on, bronies are happy to throw them under the bus and say, hey, we're not furries. And when bronies are being picked on, furries are happy to say, bronies, those guys are weird. It's going to become even more important to keep in mind that we have a lot in common, especially when you consider that the brony fandom is slowly starting to shrink. Their con attendance is starting to go down, and it's likely in the future that they'll probably find a home in the furry fandom. So let's make ourselves inviting to them. To this end, how do furries actually feel toward bronies? Well, about 1/3 of them say, bronies are awesome. What are you? About 25% don't care. The rest have a slightly more negative idea toward bronies. Now, this negativity comes in part, we've asked in previous years, where this negativity comes from. And the biggest reason is this belief that bronies are invading the fandom. Bronies are coming in and just taking over everything furries know and love. This idea that if you had a favorite artist, oh, all they do is brony art now, this sucks. The reality is that bronies aren't actually coming from the outside and invading the fandom. Bronies are coming from within the furry fandom. Bronies, who are also furries, have on average been furries for longer than non-brony furries. So these bronies are coming from furries who've been around for a few years and say, My Little Pony? I like that too. So it's not this wave of outsiders coming in, it's coming from within our fandom. And it's interesting because the furry and brony fandom are so comparable demographically. Demographically, they're almost identical. They have a similar history of being stigmatized and bullied. They have similar interests in gaming and computer stuff and other nerdy stuff. And they have similar attitudes towards porn in their fandom too. Now, in the same way that we did a study looking at whether persona species determines your personality, we did the same thing looking at whether your favorite My Little Pony character told us something about you. And there are a lot of characters. So there are a great many characters. So just look at the main 6. If you're a My Little Pony fan, this might resonate with you. For those whose favorite character was Applejack, the sort of tomboyish farm gal, they were the most likely to be male, and they also had the highest well-being. Twilight Sparkle as your favorite? Myself. You're more likely to be writers, more mature, and also to use the fandom as a source of social supports. Rarity, the sort of artist of the group, the most likely to be an artist, a cosplayer, and also the most narcissistic. Fluttershy fans, the quiet, timid, sort of nature-loving one. The biggest fans of the show were Fluttershy fans. They were the least likely to have been bullied, but also the most socially anxious around other people. Pinkie Pie, the outgoing party animal. She was the biggest one, the most strongly associated with other bronies, and was the least socially anxious. And finally, Rainbow Dash fans. They were the most closeted fans, the ones who kind of kept it to themselves the most. They were the least narcissistic, and they were the most likely to be furry. So, aww, I had to put something there.
Luna was the top for non-main 6 ponies.
Yeah, of non-main 6 ponies, Luna was the favorite. Alright, so in addition to not being bronies, furries are also not therians. This is one that the media gets wrong a lot, and this is one that a lot of furries actually don't understand themselves. So, furries are people who are fans of anthropomorphic animal media. Therians are people who aren't fans, but rather they identify with non-human animals. They say, I have the spirit or the psychology of an animal kind of trapped in a human body. 10 to 20% of furries fall into this category. So the media often says furries are people who think they're animals. No, that's therians. That's something different. They do overlap a little bit, but they're not quite the same thing. And you can see the difference between furries and therians on some of these questions. So we asked, to what extent would you become non-human if you could? Non-furries were like, what the hell does that question mean? 40% of furries said, sure, yeah, if I could become non-human, sure I would. 60% of therians said yes to this. So So furries were much more likely to endorse this. But even more of a difference, to what extent do you feel not 100% human? Again, non-furries were really confused by this one. One-third of furries said, okay, I don't feel fully human sometimes. Almost 90% of Therians say, yeah, I don't feel fully human, there's something else there. And so this shows that it's not quite right to label furries as people who self-identify as animals. That's something different. Now, I want to emphasize that when Therians say they don't feel fully human, they're not saying that if you were to do a genetic test, you would find wolf genes or something. They're very well aware that physically they're not animals, or not non-human animals, rather. It tends to be a mental, psychological, spiritual thing. They say I have the mindset or the spirit of an animal trapped in a human body. Now, we've been asked in the past, well, is this something they're saying for attention, or is this just a thing they're doing, it's kind of a gimmick? Well, we tested this. We used a task called the implicit associates task, which is a reaction time task. It's really hard to fake. And what it does is test to what extent the concept of me and the concept of animal, non-human animal, overlap in the person's mind. And for Therians, it's at the level of how their mind is working. Me and animal is overlapping and kind of inextricable from one another, at least in terms of the patterns of reaction times and the patterns of mistakes they're making on these kinds of tasks. So it's not just something they're saying, it's right down to the level of how their mind is working, that they're representing themselves as non-human animals. So we're looking more into this in the future, but it's a really cool way to kind of get at some of this data. Right, so furries are not a fetish. I've mentioned this before. I just want to sort of summarize this part by saying furries are ultimately a fan group. Furries are first and foremost a fan group like other fan groups, and the inclusion of sex in the definition kind of makes no sense in the same way that if I said video gamers are people who play video games but also occasionally masturbate to video game porn, you'd be like, wait, what was that last bit? But furries feel the same thing. When you say furries are people who are fans of anthropomorphic media, good, and also masturbate to furry porn. No. Why did you add that last part? You wouldn't add that for any other fan group. So that's what I'm really pushing for. And people will say, well, wait, there's furry porn. That means that furry is about porn. Well, there's video game porn. That doesn't mean video games are all about porn. So don't conflate being open-minded and accepting about sex with being all about sex. Don't say that just because there's porn there, that it's all about porn. And finally, furries are not deviants. There's a caveat on this one. Furries are kind of deviant statistically. We're rare. 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 10,000 people is a furry in general. That's our estimate right now. So yeah, that's statistically kind of rare. But we're not deviants in the way that most people think of deviants. We're no more violent than non-furries are. We're no more maladjusted. We've done studies looking at psychological conditions, and we find that furries are no more likely to have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder, to have been diagnosed with anything with one small exception. Asperger's or high-functioning autism is a little bit more prevalent in the furry fandom than the general public, but we think that this isn't unique to the furry fandom. We think that it's a product of any sort of fan group, because one of the defining features of Asperger's is intense interest in something, and if you're a fan, you are a person with an intense interest in something. And furries definitely aren't dysfunctional, unlike our good friend Foxdad here. I'll give you a second to read it if you want. He's disappointed ultimately that his daughter does not want to be a visitor, not want to be a furry. So, and speaking to this point that furries aren't deviant, our research team has actually started putting out PSAs and trying to get some of our information out there to make the point that furries aren't deviants the way people think they are. Furries are just kind of like anyone else, because the data suggests that furries are like anyone else. We have the same psychological needs, we have the same need to be loved, we have the same need to belong to groups, the same need to self-express, just like anyone else. We're surprisingly normal in this regard. And this is why the media can't do a good story on us, because anytime the media follows a bunch of furries around for a while, they go, when does the exciting stuff happen? And we go, this is the exciting stuff for Plante. That's the exciting stuff. So, yeah, furries, surprisingly normal. Maybe a little weird. All right. So that's getting to the end of the talk here. Just to sort of finish up here, I wanted to point out that if you want to see some of these numbers for yourself, you can see all the sort of raw numbers and data part, the nerdy part, if you go to furryresearch.org. If you want to see the sort of book, download the book First Science, which is much cleaner. It has more of the write-ups and everything, and it's sort of one nice clean package. firstscience.com. If for whatever reason you're not sick of hearing me talk yet, you can go to scplante.uwaterloo.ca and email me with any questions you have or any additional information. Yeah, at this point I'm happy to, oh yeah, right, pimping my book one more time, firstscience.com. Yeah, and I'm happy to take questions right now, so thank you very much.